Good morning and happy Friday, everyone. Thank you for joining the SnapNrack webinar of the importance of integrated wire management and solar mounting solutions. This morning we have Ezra Phillips with us. He will be our presenter. We're going to take a couple minutes or so, let everyone log in, join the webinar, give them a couple minutes in case they're hopping off from another call. So stick with us for another minute and we'll get this webinar started. Okay, good morning again, everyone. Thank you for joining SnapNrack's webinar. Those of you that are just joining, this is our importance of integrated wire management and solar mounting solutions. We have Ezra Phillips as our presenter. We're going to cover just basically the importance of wire management with our systems and SnapNrack. A couple housekeeping items this morning. If you have any questions, feel free to submit them in the chat box in the GoToWebinar format there. We'll cover them at the end of the webinar. And then if you are here for NABCEP credits, we'll get those, the certificate of completion will be emailed out no later than end of business on Monday. So just give us a little time and we'll get that emailed to you. Ezra will have a slide at the end that will cover, you know, who to email with any questions there too as well. So let's get this started. Ezra, I'm gonna pass the presenter role over to you.
All right, thanks, Jill, and thanks everybody who joined. Let me get this thing showing. Jill, can you give me a just thumbs up that it's showing my screen?
Yes, it looks like your screen's showing, but not the PowerPoint there.
Okay, let me just drag it over here. Sorry for the technical difficulties, folks.
There you go. There's the PowerPoint.
All right. So yeah, again, thanks Jill for kicking us off, and thanks everybody for joining us this morning. Appreciate your times during these busy schedules and everything else going on in the world. Today we want to talk about the importance of wire management. And you know, I think it's a really critical topic, you know, in solar. We're going to dig through these things, and again, as Jill mentioned, there's an opportunity for those of you needing NABCEP credits to also obtain those at the end of this. So agenda we're going to go through really quickly, just, you know, high level, talk a little bit about, you know, SnapNrack, who we are, and then I'm going to get into more, you know, really what we're, the meat and potatoes of it, the definition of wire management, cross-industry perspective. So, you know, how wire management, you know, as solar relates to wire management in other industries. The scope of solar wire management, some cost implications, and, you know, tie it off with kind of just the overall benefits. So with that, SnapNrack, who we are. You know, SnapNrack is, we're an industry leader in racking. We have been around for a long time, so this is not a new company. SnapNrack was originally started as part of we were originally part of REC Solar, the commercial REC Solar back in the day. And back in 2007, it started when REC decided to make their own design for a solar racking system. And that integrated, one of the big things in that is it integrated a wire channel to, as part of the structural element of the racking system that you could also run the wires into. In 2009, we actually brought the SnapNrack name out there and started selling that product not just through REC Solar, but also through AEE, which was a sister division. In 2012, a few years later, SnapNrack, the REC, AEE, and SnapNrack names kind of came under the umbrella of Mainstream Energy, and we started selling that product through what we refer to as traditional distribution, which also includes, your local distributors, your CDs, your IESs, and whatnot. At the same time, we also got some of our first patents awarded by the U.S. Patent and Trade Office. 2014 was a big year for us. We started to really realize some market share dominance, and SnapNrack was acquired by Sunrun. At the same time, we also realized or received our UL 2703 electrical bonding certification, and so that was one of the big things to come with the acquisition. In 2016, we reached 1 gigawatt of product deployed in the residential solar market, which is a huge milestone for us. And then it follows through with some additional milestones, through the years. 2017, we released our Ultra Rail product, towel replacements, the first generation of our RL product. In 2018, we brought out our umbrella sealing technology, which is kind of the cornerstone of our sealing flashing systems for all of our systems that we have today. And then last year, we updated that with our Ultra Rail, both having Ultra Rail in a standard duty Ultra Rail, our UR40, and then Ultra Rail 60, a heavy duty Ultra Rail. So basically eliminating all of our legacy product, and everything is really now in our next generation Ultra Rail, as well as our RL Universal product. And at the same time, Sunrun, our parent company, in 2019, took over the #1 market share position in residential solar, and it's no surprise there, but they're using SnapNrack product. So enough about that, though. I think that's a little bit of the background. What you guys are here to hear more about is the wire management. And so I'm going to start with a couple of NEC quotes. The definition of rooftop wire management, according to the NEC, mechanical execution of work, electrical equipment shall be installed in a neat and workmanlike manner. So there's no specifics here, but it's just kind of use common sense, guys. To make it so that things are nice and tucked away and neat and orderly. NEC 300.4 calls out protection against physical damage, where subject to physical damage, conductors, raceways, and cables shall be protected. So again, not a lot of specifics, but the idea there is, if it looks terrible, it's probably not right. Cross-industry perspective, and I think it's really important for us to understand. It's like, solar is a relatively new industry, but when you look at other industries that have had wiring around for a long time, they've found ways to tuck wiring away and have it neat and orderly. And this relates to serviceability, installability. The last thing you want to do is, if you're going into, you've got hundreds of wires in some of these installations, go in and see a rat's nest of wires and not anything tucked away. So there's a couple of images here, just to kind of ground everybody out with how best practices, so to speak, of wire management from other industries. You see like industrial buildings and whatnot. This looks like more telecom, and just good house wiring. I wish my house looked like this in some areas. It also happens in the office. You see all these devices that are out there to tuck wires neatly away in an office setting. And it's the same kind of mentality you want to take on when you're doing your wire management on a solar system up on a roof. So I have some images here as well of wire management in solar. And, I'd say actually these are probably fall in line with a little bit of those best practices. If you see everything is nice and neat and orderly, you don't see like rat's nests of wires. You see wires tucked away nice and neatly in the raceways, your MLP devices, everything's strung along. You've got the wires are nice and taut. They're not hanging down on the roof. Even in the wire management with underneath the panels, you see everything kind of has a system and way to keep everything neat and in its place. So again, when we compare solar to other industries, electrical wiring itself, it's been around for, over 100 years, from the early Edison Electric Light Company. And over the years, the industry has established very mature expectations for managing those wires. Even going back to some really old stuff, they still had it figured out. All, back in the knob and tube days, you had to keep the wiring, separated from each other. Solar, on the other hand, it's a relatively new industry. Honestly, expectations are still being established. There's the NEC codes, but they really don't go into specific details on, specifics on how you're supposed to route your wires or, manage them. And so again, it's kind of left to best practices. The other thing that's unique to solar are the conditions on the rooftop. You've got really, compared to an indoor, factory environment or a home environment, the conditions are extreme. You've got high exposure to UV light. Things are out there directly in the sunlight. You've got high heat, extreme cold, wind, rain, snow, all of that that complicate or, make it more imperative to have the wires kind of up and out of the way and not exposed to the elements. So these are some of the reminders of what we're actually dealing with. The image there on the left is, snow is something that comes into play. Hailstorms are another thing that come into play, especially in the Midwest. Not so much in California, although we do get them. But yeah, hailstorms, and then just the reality of what can actually happen there on the right. Under a faulty wire management or a faulty system, it can result in fires and to catastrophic building damage related to the solar system. That's something everybody wants to avoid. So when you talk about wire management, and I apologize because I don't have the mix of who on this call is some of the back office people, like myself included, and those of you that are actually installing. But it's really easy for us back office people to say, oh yeah, that's just so simple. Look at the schematic diagram. It's there's really nothing there. So this is kind of a reminder. Wire management on paper is really simple. Out in the field, I have nothing but respect for the installers that put this stuff in all day long. So wire management, on paper, it's, we're talking about a 3-line diagram for residential solar. It makes everything look really easy. It's not. And I think those of you that have experience in the field, can absolutely attest to it. The wire management in reality consists of, MC4 connectors, MLP devices, microinverters, optimizers, tucking all that wiring cabling in, conduit. A lot of things go into play where, from a 3-line diagram, you're talking about just one little segment of that 3-line diagram. The reality of it is everything we're talking about here is, made up within, like 1/7 of that 3-line diagram. So, and again, there's not really, detailed instructions of how all of this stuff is to go in. So a lot of the companies, they have to rely on their installers' know-how of the proper procedures, or their own installers, industry, installation procedures to get it right. There's no like NEC code that specifies how to route the wires, because every system is actually very different. So ultimately, there's a need for a clear need to provide, integral, intuitive solutions for rooftop wire management. You hear the word intuitive a lot in our product, and I think it's because of this. There is, we are relying on the installers to have it right and to do it. You want to make it simple and easy. And so, if you can find products or use products that are intuitive in nature, that are, just kind of naturally fall into place, you're going to have a much higher success rate of installing this product in the field. So why is it important? Why does anybody care? I think some of the circumstances around wire management are, obviously everybody wants to get their job done. The last thing you want to do in getting the job done is a failed inspection. Aesthetics, if you've got a homeowner that just spent, $10, $20, $30,000 putting a huge solar system on the roof, the last thing they want to do is look up and see a bunch of dangling wires, and it looks bad. And there's obviously, from an aesthetic perspective, that's critical. There's the safety issues of it along with that. Service calls are another thing. You're putting up this system, it's intended to last for 20, 20 plus years, 30 years even, you know, the last thing you want to do is be going back to the field to fix things a month after it's installed, 2 months, 2 years even. Ideally, you're putting that thing up there and it's done. It's there for the prolonged, you know, lifespan of the system. So that's what we're installing for, is the overall life of the system. You want to do it once, do it right, and not have to constantly go up there and make repairs and fix things. So a few things that can happen. I mean, when you think about it, wire damage. Wire insulation damage can lead to shorts, electrical failure, and even fire. So, you know, the majority of rooftops in the US are composition shingle. And it's pretty easy to see, especially in this image on the upper right there, like, you know, if those wires are dangling on that roof, that's just like sandpaper right against those electrical insulators, right against the insulation. You know, it's going to grind down over time as the wind blows. Those wires are going to move and you know, abrade down to the point where you've got bare contact, and that can lead to problems in the electrical system. The other thing is, you know, sharp edges. You've got the racking system itself, you know, L feet within the racking system. That's a, you know, an L foot, but there's also other components, systems that are up on the roof, you know, AC systems and vent pipes themselves are pretty, you know, nice and rounded, but there's other things up on the roof that can abrade the wires. So you kind of have to take that, that mentality of, hey, these wires need to be protected. How do I get them up and out of the way, tucked away so they're not resting on the roof, up against sharp surfaces, you know, get them out of the way. The wires are critical to the infrastructure of that solar system. Another thing related to hanging wires, you know, a couple things here. You got a couple images here. You know, so cable ties tend to be the, you know, industry standard, so to speak. You know, and a lot of people use, you know, different cable ties. There are PV ties that are, you know, intended to last for a long time. At the end of the day, they're still cable ties. They have a life expectancy to them. If they're installed correctly, you know, they can last, but you know, there's also going to be a desire to grab off-the-shelf cable ties. You know, if you're running short on a job site and you got something in the truck, the reality of it is off-the-shelf cable ties are not going to last forever. You know, there is a standard life expectancy of all cable ties, and most of them, you know, are not in line with the 20-year life expectancy or of a solar system, or even, you know, 20-year lease of a solar system. You're relying on those wires, you know, staying up with a 10-cent cable tie. It's like, how much, you know, insurance do you need? That's probably not the right way to go. Another thing to consider is when you've got hanging wires, you know, beyond having them come in contact with the roof itself, is they can be an obstruction for the weather, specifically snow, ice, you know, ice dams, water freezing, you know, and melting and refreezing. Ice dams can do a lot of damage to the solar system. So you want to get the wires up and out of the way so that they're not touching or impacted by snow and ice that might ultimately cause, you know, strain on terminations. And you know, you start pulling on those the wires, that's going to pull on the panels. You can damage the panels and ultimately pull those things off, which the bottom right image is a great example of. So exposure is another thing. You know, UV exposure and water exposure. So, you know, PV wire itself, it's rated for sunlight resistance. And I think the key word there is resistance, you know, but when you think about the roof environment, you know, a lot of time you're talking about direct exposure to sunlight. So direct exposure to sunlight, UV resistance, those wires are not going to last forever. So where you have situations where you got wires just like out in the sun, out in the exposed air, you know, over time, that insulation is going to wear down and break down, and ultimately could result in failure of the system. Another key point is junction boxes. So, you know, I think everyone's familiar that, you know, wire terminations need to be terminated in a junction box. So an improperly installed junction box can result in failure. And I think the big problem here is moisture and water. I'll go off on a little bit of a tangent for a second, but you know, most of the industry, ourselves included, offer, you know, NEMA 4 junction boxes, which is a water sealed junction box. But as soon as you drill a hole in that junction box to route a conduit termination, even if it's a water sealed conduit termination, that's no longer a NEMA 4 rating. You know, you basically adulterated that junction box in one way or another. And so you're kind of relying on the water sealing of the system. Another thing that happens with junction boxes is you can see moisture due to even just condensation, not water itself, you know, traveling from rain or anything, but just condensation working its way into that junction box. So a key thing to do is put drainage holes in the junction box. So you're basically taking a water sealed, watertight junction box. It needs to be sealed, especially from the top and from the elements, but also, you know, creating an opportunity for any water that somehow can get in there to get out, so it doesn't result in shorting like you see in the image here. I mean, obviously this is a pretty catastrophic failure. So again, it's just kind of, you know, thinking through everything. Exposure is one of the other things that you want to be cognizant of on the wire management of your solar system, both UV, water, you know, and other. Critters, everybody's favorite topic. You know, this is another thing that can happen with the solar system. And so critters, squirrels, chipmunks, pigeons, everybody will, the solar system itself is an ideal little home for critters. You know, you've got this nice array, it's warm up on the rooftop, it's protected from the elements. Those solar panels create like a nice, just, you know, rain safe roof for them up there. They're up and away from the ground and predators. So yeah, we see, you know, in certain regions more than others, but squirrels, chipmunks, pigeons, you know, they will like to get in there. They will chew on the wires. They can nest underneath the array, causing electrical issues, as well as roof leaks. So, you know, even if they're not, if it's an animal that isn't chewing on the wires itself, if something is nesting in there, the design of the roof is to sheet water off. So, you know, beyond the electrical issues, what you can have is if you have a nesting situation, it's gonna potentially collect water and, you know, interfere with the waterproofing. As much as a service call for an electrical issue, you can also realize service calls for, you know, water leaks, which is something that no homeowner wants to deal with. So the recommendation here is, you know, really, if you live in an area where your array is, you know, be cognizant of everything, but if you live in an area where your array is subject to pests, that's another consideration you should make when, you know, designing your solar systems. Start to consider something to prevent the pests, you know, some sort of a critter guard mechanism, and there's lots of different ones out there. So getting into it, why is all of this important? You know, I think that the grounding, no pun intended with grounding there, but, you know, the grounding premise here is, you know, these are systems that are designed for a 20 to 25 year lifespan. Failure of the wiring, it's inherent risk to energy production as well as safety, and proper wire management. If you do it right, you get everything out of the way, mitigates all of those risks to failure and, again, energy production for the life of the system. So there is a little bit of guidance. Again, this is kind of, you know, it's not specific, but there's a little bit of guidance on wire management. So NEC 334.30 calls out non-metallic sheathed cables shall be supported and secured by staples, cable ties, straps, hangers, similar fittings designed and installed so as to not damage the cable at intervals not exceeding 4.5 feet and within 12 inches of every outlet, junction box, cabinet, or fitting. So this is more, you know, designed around internal use, but, you know, the whole thing is looking at ways to manage the wires that in a way that is not going to damage the cable and get it up and supported and out of the way. So the highlights of, you know, areas to consider, again, as I mentioned previously, sharp edges, contact with abrasive surfaces, the roof, you know, is the key one there. Other things to consider are, you know, just bending radius of the wire. You know, all of those wires have a recommended bending radius. The ideal state is you're not sitting there and, like, you know, tightening that thing in so it's making these like hairpin turns on top of itself and then zip tying it all together in a nice tight little bundle. That's not ideal for the long-term usefulness of wires. Use of nylon cable ties. I mean, strongly consider, where and how you're using them. If you're using them, ideally, you don't have to, but if you do have to use them, figure out how to use them in a way that's potentially non-risky. Direct sunlight exposure to wires and the insulation. Overfilled strainer leafs and junction boxes, making sure your junction boxes have room in there, not everything's not cramped together, and also being cognizant of, water sealing and or water drainage. Labeling of wires, again, that kind of goes back to some of those cross-industry practices, but if somebody does have to service this system, it sure makes it a heck of a lot easier if everything's neatly labeled and easy to understand what's what in there. And then the potential for animal nesting is another thing, obviously, to take into consideration. So I'm going to move into, best practices. I think what I've been covering so far has been a lot of, hey, what can happen, things you need to consider. So how do you do it right? Here is an example. Obviously this is a SnapNrack rail, but this is how we as a manufacturer have approached the solution set. So the SnapNrack rail has a integrated rail channel. So it's a structural rail that has a wide open channel on the top that's fully intended for running the wires in that channel. What that does is that creates almost like a rigid conduit for your wires to run in. So just as you had, rigid conduit for running, wires outside of this structural mounting system, this does essentially the same thing, especially when it's covered up by panels on top. And we have, certain devices that go in to hold the wires in place. One of those is that wire retention clip. And so these are here, there's another slide on it a little bit later, but, basically you run the wires in that open wire channel. You can use the clips to hold the wires down in place while you're doing your installation. Another thing that you have is the universal wire clamp. You can use this to secure wires off of, junction boxes or run wires from rail to rail, row to row within your array. Junction boxes, MLP devices are another thing. By getting these up and mounted onto the rail itself, you get them off the roof. You remove potential areas for water intrusion into the roof. It's an ideal state to be able to use that rail for mounting of not just the solar panel itself, but the wires, but also anything else related to the solar system. Get everything up and off the roof and mount it into the rail. So in our case, our junction box actually snaps into the rail itself. These are, this is a picture of basically how those wire management clips snap in. So they just snap into the rails themselves. As you're laying down your solar panels, you can run the wires right down the rail itself and then snap these wire clips into place, holding everything in place. Essentially, once the wire's held in there, it's not going to go anywhere. So this is a really nice product within the portfolio that we offer that helps you keep the wires neatly tucked away. Again, the whole premise is getting the wires inside the rail. MLP devices, this is a great image of, how everything is tucked away neatly. You see even the wires that are going row to row, nothing is loose. All the wires are nice and taut. They're held in place securely. This system is absolutely ready to lay down panels and not have any problems with the wires coming into contact with the roof surfaces or getting in the way of each other. Everything's nice and neat and put away really evenly. So conduits are another piece. We spend a lot of time talking about PV wires, but the system includes more than just the PV wiring. The best systems out there are also, offering, adjacent products like conduit mounts. So taking into account the entire system. So dedicated conduit mounts for running it, up and down the roof. Having systems both for composition shingle and for tile, metal, any roof types, you have to just be thinking through it. What is the right product for the application? 3/4 and 1 inch conduits, we're starting to see systems that have, larger requirements. Down in Texas, where you've got these, just huge arrays, you're starting to see needs for 1 1/4 and 1.5 inch conduits too. So be cognizant of, everything that's going into the installation of the solar system and the wire management. And then array edge screen. So, I mentioned earlier, this is an image of one of the products that's out there on the market. This is the SnapNrack product. Again, there's others, but you want to have a system that is designed to keep critters out. If you have all the wires tucked in and up away from the roof surfaces, and you're not, then you can take the array and use some sort of a critter guard system to keep critters out. Now you're protecting your system for the life of it. You're not going to get squirrels, pests, and whatnot, burrowing in there, chewing on wires, getting in there, nesting, creating problems for you in the future. So a lot of the systems you see are similar to this. They have a screen type system. There's different clips. The SnapNrack system is a nice toolless clip system, but the ideal system is able to keep critters out while also providing ventilation to keep the system cool and keep the energy production of those panels optimized as much as possible. So this is an image that we love. This is an image of the junction box, but this really speaks to having everything neat, tidy, orderly. Everything's wired. You compare this to the image of that junction box that we had that was kind of fried, in the earlier slide. Somebody, if they do have to go up and service this system, they're going to have a much happier day going up and seeing this thing versus what you saw before. And installers that do this, generally we see there's like a pride of workmanship. The guys like to do, everybody wants to do a good job. You want to do good work. You feel a lot better after installing something that looks like this, and the image on the right as well, with all the wires tucked neatly away in the rail and the grounding and everything like that, compared to a sloppy rat's nest up on the roof. So some features of again, the SnapNrack system that we've tried to do within our design of the Ultra Rail system is create a snap-in system. It's intuitive. Everything has it goes together easily, snaps together, single tool. By making it intuitive, it decreases the training time. It increases the likelihood that the crews are going to get it right the first time up on the roof. We have those wire retention clips. They protect the wires. They keep it securely in place inside the rail channel, which ultimately decreases the risk of damage and service calls and callbacks and for the life of the system. So that's rail. The question then is, okay, well, what the heck do you do when you don't have rail? And you see a lot of railless systems are taking a stronghold in the market, in the industry. There's a huge advantage for some installers and some industry and some regions of using railless systems. And so the question is, yeah, we've kind of figured it out now through the years how to do rail really well. What the heck do you do for railless systems? The challenge is fundamentally different without the rails. So what you're having to do is you don't have the rails to tie your PV wire into. You've got to figure out how to tie it to the panels. The panels in a railless system ultimately become the rail structure. And so how do you mimic what you can do with rail by doing it with the railless? So in most cases, what you see is you're going to use the channel that's underneath the modules itself. So where you can see down here in the bottom left, this is kind of a cross section of a panel. You do have a channel in here. It's pointing sideways, so it's not ideal because gravity's not working 100% in your favor. But you have a channel here where you can tuck things away. So what all of the railless systems have done is leveraged that rail channel for use with wire management and mounting of additional components like MLP devices. So everything's mounted to the frames themselves. With railless system, it's also important just to plan out the job. So you don't have the luxury of rail. You can save time if you put some thought into it a little bit. So if you prep out the modules, in advance, come up with a plan for minimizing any long home runs. If you're having to run those home runs in the channels of the panels themselves, figure out how you're going to minimize the length of those home runs as much as possible. And then figure out the mounting strategy for you to use so that you can, for each one of your panels of how you're going to clip those things so that they're just going to go into place. It's much easier to do all of the wire prepping for your panels down on the ground, on the side of the box truck, as opposed to doing it up on the roof while you're, tied in, kind of hanging off. Hopefully not too steep of a roof if you're having to do a lot of wire management, but you can get the sense that doing it on the ground is the ideal state. One thing to note, everybody's got wire clips. The SnapNrack wire clip is a little bit different. Ours actually points in. So I mentioned if you're using that wire channel or the channel within the frame as a place to route your wires, in this case you have glass running right here. You don't have gravity working for you in the same way that you would with a rail where everything's pointing up. What we've done is we've made it so the opening of the wire is pointing inside. So this wire clip installed here, in addition to the flat face on the box frame, actually does something very similar. It makes it so the wire really can't come out of here. It's going to be very difficult. Whereas if this opening is pointing outward towards the inside, if you tug on these wires, they can pop out. And that's what we've seen with some other clips that are out there in the market. Another example of the wire management on the Railless system related to the MLP devices, so optimizers and whatnot. Again, strategy, get everything tucked up and out of the way. You can bring the panels up a ladder lift, with everything tucked away, and then the installers up on the roof are literally just slapping down the glass. They're just laying things in and, installing in the way they would with a system that doesn't have so much MLP. But the idea is get everything done down on the ground where it's easy to access, using clips, products available to tuck the wires up and into the panels and out of the way. And then when it comes to junction boxes, rapid shutdowns, other devices, what we have done is we actually on our Railless system we have a track. This is our flash track. This provides north-south adjustment of the mount itself, leveraging those flash tracks that are already there to mount other components. So, in the cases of grounding, MLPs, those sorts of things, your junction box, you can use those flash tracks to mount those up on the roof. Ideally, if you're using it in penetrations that are already there for your mounting system, you're reducing the numbers of holes you're drilling in the customer's roof. Another product that's out there is, the wire saver. And so what this is this is a product that is the, choose your expletive clamp or clip that goes in after the fact. So the way this product works is, ideally if you have the array that's up on the roof, you're at the end of the day, you realize, expletive, I've got a hanger up there. This device goes in there. You can use a piece of cable or something like that to scoop up that wire, and this thing will snap up into place and hold that wire up and out of the way. It's designed to clip in between the panels themselves. It's more of a emergency device kind of after the fact. It's made of a polymer that's designed for full UV exposure through the life of the system. I think the idea with use of this product is it's not intended to be the primary wire management device. It's a secondary in case you have a problem or for a service call. If a service call comes up and something's tucked in loose, you have to weigh whether it's better to deconstruct the whole system to tuck everything in, or hey, can I use this device and cause less damage to the system and tuck up my wires using this. So putting it all into perspective, the cost of a service call. Service calls add up. When you think about, the vehicle expense, labor to send somebody out on a truck roll to go out into the field, the materials they're minor. If you have $10 worth of material, in a truck roll, it's a fraction of what it actually costs. But it's your time, your labor that is the total cost of the service call. So, vehicle, labor, materials, opportunity cost. Where the opportunity cost is something that you should be out doing. Ideally, you want to be installing, not going out and fixing systems. Total cost of a single service call is $360, for a $10 component. So I think hopefully this, kind of highlights how important it is just to get it right the first time. Cost of downtime is another thing that needs to be considered. So, when you think about your customers, and your revenue related to their solar PV system, you want that system to be running. So if that system is down from like 3 to 30 days, that downtime, in addition to the service call, can add on another, ideally if it's 21 bucks, but can add up to another couple $100 on top of the cost that you're, realizing or not realizing due to, again, a simple like $10 component or even a simple 15-cent wire clip that's gone bad within the system. So, this basically shows out, a $360 service call cost related to, the life of a nylon zip tie. The zip ties are 3 cents each, 15 cents each, whatever it is. The life of them is 4 years. Think about how many times, if you have the life of a 4-year zip tie, how many times you're going to keep going back out. It just, at the end of the day, it doesn't make sense. Whereas if you can go with a system where you can tuck everything away, get everything where it's not going to come loose, you're going to greatly extend the life of the system. You're going to reduce the number of times you have to go out into the field and mess with it. And you're going to have a more satisfied customer for the length of the service. So, where it comes out, where kind of it sums up is, you got to think through this stuff. There's ultimately just, there's an industry need for integrated solution for wire management. And we say integrated because, integrating wire management into the racking. As an installer, you got to think of that. Wire management's got to be a forethought. It can't be an afterthought in the system installation. If you procure and design with and install products and have it, as part of the upfront installation process, you're going to extend the life of your system. You're going to have happier customers throughout that life. And use products that are specified for use with wire management. Again, a zip tie is just, I use them to put wires up around the house around Christmas. It's not, intended to be this like long 20-year outdoor life of a system type of a product. So that's where it kind of comes into play. With that, I thank everybody for joining this call, hearing me ramble for the last, 40 minutes or so. I can open it up to questions or thoughts. If anybody has anything, please feel free to type your questions into the chat, and I'll take some time to answer all those. And again, reminder, Jill will be mailing knapsack credits to folks that have provided their emails as required. And also, if you have questions, we strongly encourage you to connect on our social media platforms. Follow us. We've got a lot of great content coming out there. We're on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube. The content's constantly coming out there. Stay with us, stay relevant, stay abreast of everything that we've got coming out. We've got some exciting new products coming out in 2020. So with that, I'll open it up.
Awesome. Thanks, Ezra. I'm looking here. I'm not seeing any questions coming through right now. We can give it a couple minutes as we wait for those to filter through. Not seeing questions, but like you said, if anyone, you guys have questions that do come up, feel free to reach out to us. You guys can either email me directly. You can also email us at our contact@SnapNrack email, or reach out to us on social media. That's a great way to get a hold of us as well. We're active on those channels. But again, I'm not seeing questions. Quiet group this Friday morning. So with that, we can conclude the webinar, give you guys 15 minutes back in the day. So thanks again, Ezra, and thank you all for attending this webinar.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.